Good morning, Garland Nixon. It's a beautiful, rainy Friday morning here in Maryland, and we have the one and only Joti Brar. Let's talk. Oops. Sorry, I've got other noise going on here at the same time. I got to figure out. Wondered why this thing was still running. Okay, all right. Sorry about that. Technical errors here. As my dad used to say, when I'd say, "Hey, what's wrong with my car?" He'd say, "You got to loosen up behind the wheel." All right. So let's get going. Things are a bit, shall we say, unstable these days economically, Jody. And one of the things that is interesting, and if we go back to Nord Stream, right, where the U.S. pounded Germany, basically, let me change this differently. The super rich in Germany are still super rich, but the people who really took a beating from the Nord Stream attack were the working class, right? We now see, I'm going to add two other things to it. The Trump administration is doing all of these tariffs, and ultimately now the big tariff is on China, which makes me suspicious that maybe that was the target all along. But whatever the case may be, the people who are going to suffer will be the working class, right? Let me add this. There are those saying, hey, why would the Trump administration go messing around with Yemen again? They've been bombing them for the last 10 years. It does no good. And they're like, but we're going to bomb them. This time it's going to work. And everybody's like, well, it's not going to work. Why would they do that? But there was traffic flowing through the Red Sea, the beneficiary being Europe. That's where they get all kind of their goods and stuff flowing from Asia to Europe and various places. So now that they're fighting Yemen again, the Red Sea closes down, and who gets hurt? Europe. So my point it seems to me that the imperialist, the domination in the U.S. now, everything they do seems to hurt their allies, so-called. You know what I mean? We're going to blow up Germany, or we're going to hurt the working class in the U.S., or we're going to hurt the Europeans doing that. And at some point, I start to think that this is, as they say in the tech world, that it's a feature and not a bug. Your thoughts about this dominant thing that seems to have really turned inward, Jody?
Thanks, Garland. I feel like I need to do some more detailed research and analysis into this craziness we're looking at right now. So I can only give you a kind of surface impressions that I'm getting, and I might be wrong about some of the detail because I haven't examined it as much as I would like to have done. But I just start by saying, back in, was it 2016 when Trump was elected the first time?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Our party wrote a leaflet because obviously there was all this alarmism at that time about, oh my God, this is fascism in action. And we said, number one, that Donald Trump being elected was a better outcome for the people of the world than Hillary getting elected, because he's on the one hand, it's a mask off face for US imperialism. He's not nice presentation like he got with Obama. He's not, oh, look, racism has been solved. We have a black man. They were going for sexism has been solved. We've got a woman. You have this real, very crass, boorish figure in Donald Trump. But the other thing, our slogan on the front of that leaflet was Donald Trump, a loose cannon on the imperialist deck. And the reason we evaluated him that way is because, like a loose cannon in the olden days when cannons were on ships' decks, right? If it's not pinned down, it starts going off in all directions. And sometimes it hits its own site. Yeah. And our view of Donald Trump is he is a master of creating chaos in his own ranks, right? And for us, again, as people who oppose US imperialism and the imperialist system, the fact that the CEO, the chief presenter of US imperialism on the world stage, is a loose cannon, is a disorganizing and chaotic force, is something that we welcome. Now, of course, that doesn't end our battle. Our battle is not to get someone elected in the White House. Our battle is to get rid of imperialism. But we should be able to take advantage of disarray in the enemy camp. If we're not able to take advantage of it, that's because our level of organization is so piss poor, pardon my French. And that's something we need to deal with, right? We need to deal with our ideological development. We need to deal with our organizational problems. We need to build a genuine working class movement that's able to maneuver and take advantage of the splits, chasms, chaos in the ranks of the enemy class, right? So that's just kind of by the by, a bit of, context for all these conversations. Certain things I'm seeing when it comes to all this tariff business that strike me as interesting, contradictory, and probably self-defeating. On the one hand, this thing you pointed out about these tariffs are affecting allies as well as enemies. Well, I have no doubt that the primary target of this big drive is China. The USA is obsessed with bringing down China for all kinds of reasons that we've gone into. But basically, number one, it desperately needs to get rid of liberated territories in the globe. And China is the chief liberated territory. And China is a liberated base that aids other countries to effect liberation as well. It doesn't do it in the old way of, funding liberation fighters around the world, but it does it by allowing countries to choose the extent to which they depend on the USA, US economy, US debt, US technology for their development. And so that means when countries are able to get themselves a government or a system which is in favor of sovereignty for the people and for the country, they have a partner they can rely on for military support, for technological transfer, for trade, for development of their infrastructure and their industry and all kinds of things, right? So this is a massive undermining of the global imperialist system of which the USA is the chief beneficiary, right? The USA is so rich fundamentally because it loots the world. It's not fundamentally through the sweat of its workers. It's fundamentally through the loot of the rest of the world. The sweat of the workers of the entire globe feeds the wealth of American imperialism. So they're desperate to bring down China as a competitor, but they're also desperate to restore profitability to a system that is teetering on the brink of real collapse. They want to restore profitability by destroying, looting, breaking up China and having free access to all of its people, resources, everything. So their big goal is the destruction of China. We've talked before about how the Russia war was very much a part of, they want to destroy Russia as well, but Russia's their kind of number two concern. It was pushed into number one place for a while because a section of the US ruling class was able to persuade or become strong enough to be the majority and say, no, the way to get China is to get Russia first. They've failed. And we mustn't forget that. This is all happening in the context of NATO, the biggest, strongest, certainly most expensive military alliance on the planet, took on Russia. That is what happened on the battlefields of Ukraine. They destroyed Ukraine. They did not destroy Russia. They lost. They have lost that war, and they're trying to come to terms with that, what that means. They're trying not to let on to the rest of the world that that's what happened, or to their own people that that's what happened. I saw a clip, maybe it was just yesterday, a clip of Tucker Carlson saying those exact words, right? More and more people have seen it. We just lost a war. NATO just lost a war against Russia. Militarily, we couldn't win. That's massive. It's absolutely massive because the whole way that imperialism operates is, number one, technological and financial domination, but number two, backed up by military domination. And of course, the technical and military domination kind of combine, to have the most advanced weapons, to have weapons the other side can't answer. So you come with your huge amount of money and buy up everyone and everything in sight if you can. But if you're resisted, if there's pushback, if there's some way in which you're not getting your way, the gun comes out and the other side doesn't have an answer to your weapons. That's really how imperialism works, has always worked, right? The problem is, again, China and Russia are not able to be beaten by the USA's military. And the war in Ukraine has proved this decisively. Decisively. Huge amount of munitions, an insane amount of resources of the West thrown into that war, and they lost. Really decisively, on every level, they lost. So this is also a very important context for the situation we're in. Trump, I think, represents a minority, or what was a minority section of the ruling class, in terms of his view that protectionism is the answer to the crisis, the global economic crisis, right? He's been brought in, number one, to kind of cover the fact of the defeat and present it as a policy change. Oh, we didn't get defeated. We changed the guy in the White House, and this guy likes peace, not war. I mean, you couldn't get a more nonsensical statement than to say that Donald Trump likes peace. He absolutely doesn't. Donald Trump wants to preserve US imperialism. He wants to preserve US imperialist dominance of the planet. He just has a different, and the people around him, let me just say, the shorthand we say Donald Trump, but we mean the regime, the team around him, the section of the ruling class he represents. They have a different idea of how to achieve that than the team around Biden had. But the question is, are either of these visions actually viable? And my short answer is no. Both of them are self-destructive. Both of them are approaches which, while trying to reverse the crisis, are ending up accelerating the crisis. The failure of the sanctions war against Russia deepened and accelerated the global economic crisis. The same thing, I think, is happening with these tariffs. They are, of course, ultimately aimed at China, but they're also aimed at kind of shoring up US economic dominance in a world where even US allies are starting to think diversifying and not relying on the dollar might be a good idea. And Trump's like, no, everybody has to rely on the dollar. But at the same time, he wants everyone to rely on the dollar and prop up US imperialism. He's acting like he does this presentation trick. I mean, this is where Trump is a showman, right? And the people around him write him very good lines for a showman, for people who don't understand anything, because he repeats very simple messages that make sense if you don't know anything. Like, we're doing the world a favor by paying for peace and prosperity. And they should be paying us. So what he's saying is, everywhere where we've put one of our aggressive military bases around the world, those countries should pay us. Why are they freeloading off us? So Trump gives this message like the world's freeloading off the US empire. But if you stop and rewind, he's basically saying, in order to preserve US hegemony, we have to be such a strong bully that the whole world feels it must keep paying us to stay the world's preeminent imperialist power. He's demanding and making it sound like he's doing everyone a favor and it's a just demand. He's demanding that people pay for the privilege of being exploited by US imperialism. And what we're seeing is really barefaced gangsterism, isn't it? But it's interesting that I noticed, I forget his name, but even one of his supporters, who's a hedge fund manager, like super duper rich, and who wants tariffs, wants China to be destroyed, wants all these wars to continue, wants the USA to remain the predominant power, he pointed out that maybe announcing a global trade war against absolutely everybody all at once might backfire. Because actually what you're doing is incentivizing people to diversify and become resilient as quickly as possible. And so instead of BRICS, I heard Trump say some stupid comment like BRICS was dead the day I announced my tariffs. It's like, you've made it absolutely certain that more countries will want to join BRICS. More countries will be speeding up their process of diversification, of working out how to trade outside of the dollar system. This way of presenting gangsterism as if we're just stopping people freeloading off us, well, it might make a good narrative for trying to support, to get support from Trump's working class base. But it's utterly nonsensical, and it won't wash with governments and economists and business people all around the world. It becomes very clear, even from the logic of just trying to, do business from a different country. More and more, it's going to be clear to people that what we need to be is sovereign. And in order to achieve that, we need to detach ourselves from the US dominated system. And that means, of course, not just in terms of trade, but also in terms of military, in terms of technology, the drive for other countries to catch up and become, sovereign and independent. It's going to attract them more and more towards Russia and China, which are the bases of all those things, of the ability to give people sovereign technology, and strong military protection that enables them to detach themselves from the ability of the US gangsters in chief to bully them into submission. And just finally, I just want to come to a point about the working class in the USA and in imperialist countries, because while this may short term have some benefit for some imperialists, and I'm sure others will actually be hurting, but some of them may get a short-term benefit. I mean, for example, you saw that Warren Buffett had been divesting from a lot of stock market stuff for quite a while, because, of course, let's not forget, when we're looking at a percentage drop in the stock market, you should look at the wider context of how massively inflated the stock market has become. Again, part of the overproduction crisis. There's nowhere productive for all this capital to be invested. So share prices become massively overinflated, as do all kinds of asset prices, whether it's art or land or, buildings or, whatever it might be. All of these types of assets are being massively inflated, as is crypto, as is, whatever. Ponzi schemes proliferating. It's all this desperation of the imperialists to keep making profits when the market is glutted and the people are impoverished. And the reality is there actually isn't a way to solve that problem, but they're casting around trying to find ways. So we have this massively overinflated stock market, and now we're seeing these massive corrections in the stock market. But fundamentally, whoever gets rich or poor from all of this, it's hedge funds and all the rest of it. Of course, a lot of people lose out because they've been forced. Pension funds have been forced over the recent decades to invest in the stock market. So ordinary people who get pensions from their work or even from the state will find their pension suddenly goes whoop, because the stock market went. And of course, that's a way, again, of tying people into feeling that the health of the stock market is important to them. It shouldn't be. Really shouldn't be. It's about tying us into the system and making us feel we want to be loyal to the system, and we don't want any shocks to the system because, but I won't get my pension. It's like having a mortgage. It's supposed to stop you ever going on strike, right? Because I've got my house and I have to keep paying for it. But fundamentally, tariffs are not a tax on the country that produces the goods. They're a tax on the people who buy the goods. And the people who pay are workers. That's who the price gets passed on to. If there's a price, if something is coming in from China to the USA and there's a 50% tariff put on that because it was made in China, I mean, the lunacy about that is the company that was making it in China is probably not a Chinese company. Right? But anyway, the company, it was made in China, so you bring it over here and now it adds a 50% tariff. Well, that money goes to the US government, okay, but who pays it ultimately? It's the consumer, it's the person who buys that product. Now, cheap imports from around the world is one of the ways in which the employers in the West have been able to get away with real terms pay cuts for the last 20, 30 years. Because cheap goods are coming from abroad, the purchasing power of declining wages has been kind of boosted. and we've been less aware of how much our wages are going down because these goods are getting so cheap, and we're able to have this free flow. So we've actually been being subsidized. Our lifestyle has been subsidized by the labor of workers in China and other poor countries, providing us with very cheap goods. But now this is being presented as, oh, look, they destroyed our economy. No, imperialism destroyed your economy. And this is a process that was ongoing in every imperialist country before the Chinese Revolution even happened. Right. And that's, again, something that people just don't understand, that the development of capitalism into monopoly capitalism and the development of capitalism into imperialism, which is an economic system where export of capital rather than export of goods becomes the primary activity of imperialist heartlands, and where step by step all of their industry gets exported because it's cheaper to do it abroad and you make more profit that way. That's the activity of your homegrown capitalists. They're the ones who took your jobs away because it'd be more profitable for them to do it. So blaming the countries they went to, the countries who have been kept poor mainly, in conditions where they're sweating to give you cheap goods, right? Without understanding that this is just how capitalism and imperialism operates. You can't fix these problems by looking within the system for a solution, because it's a problem that's created by the system itself.
Wow. Excellent stuff. What I'd like to do next is give me about 3 or 4 minutes to do a little bit of a presentation to you. 3 to 5 minutes. I'll make it quick because I want to get right back to you. But so here's, I really want to get your thoughts on it. Okay. So over the weekend, last weekend, there was this alleged protest rally against Donald Trump. And it was an organization called Hands Off. Now, what you'll find interesting is Hands Off. The only thing they were angry about was the whole focus was Trump and Elon Musk. They're terrible. They're horrible. Those two individuals are destroying everything. Hands off, right? Hands off, mass mobilization, hands off, blah, blah, blah. So I start looking at Hands Off, and being the former investigator that I am, I'm like, who the hell is Hands Off, right? Hands off. And why is it that there's, they're not seem to be doing anything but saying Trump and Musk are bad. So I go down here and I see, for general increase, please protect, response at indivisible.org. So I'm like, okay. And I look online, indivisible.org. That's who's behind this whole Hands Off thing, right? Okay. So then I say, well, the obvious thing to do at this point is we need to take a look at indivisible.org. Let's see. What the heck is indivisible.org? Oh, okay. Well, I'm not going to go there. Well, why don't I do that? I'm going to go there anyway. Indivisible.org. I'll show you that. Like I said, it's important. All right. So I now go to indivisible.org. They are behind this whole Hands Off thing. And voila, we've got indivisible.org, Trump and Musk, the whole thing. Stop Trump. Trump. It's all about Trump and Musk. Who are we? Well, when you see who they are, our leadership, it's these two people. Leah Greenberg is the co-executive, and Ezra Levin. So these are the people who are behind this whole Hands Off protest, right? So how the heck are they? Right? All right. Lastly, we'll figure out who they are. I find an article a while back, and that article is who's behind Indivisible, right? So I'm like, okay, this ought to tell me who Leah Greenberg, and I find out these are the people behind this gigantic, extremely well-funded, incredibly well-funded opposition protest to Trump and Musk. And might I add, the thing I found suspicious was where normally when we have like anti-war protests, you can't find them anywhere on the news. This was all over the news. And these two people were constantly being interviewed. You're standing up. These are the people behind standing up to Trump. Okay. So I go down there and I search, and at some point I find out who they are. Let me find it. Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin. These are the two people behind it, right? So Greenberg worked for the founder of eBay, Pierre Omidyar, right? She held various advisory fellowship positions at the State Department. She worked for Democratic Congressman Tom Perello. What you might need to know about Tom Perello is for years, he was the executive director of George Soros' Open Society Foundation. So she worked for the guy who was the ED, and she was in the State Department, right? Then we go down and we find her husband, her co-worker to stand up against Trump and Musk. And we look at this guy and we found that he worked directly for the Obama administration as an advisor, and he was the director of federal policy for a group called Prosperity Now. Prosperity Now, among its many donors, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bank of America, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Morgan Stanley, PayPal, FDIC. Oh, one of the most concerning funders of Prosperity Now is BlackRock. So here's my point. I left one thing out that is incredibly important. So, and you're going to love this. This is the most important part. So this hands-off massive protest supported by all the mainstream media, run by these two State Department BlackRock operatives, right? But they had a hands-off sign, and you're going to love this hands-off sign because it's hands-off. Let me show you the hands-off sign. This is it. Hands off. Look at that right in the middle. Hands off Medicare, Social Security, public lands, veteran, hands off cancer, hands off
NATO.
Hands off NATO. You bastards. How dare you go after NATO?
The organization of the people.
Yeah, they stood up and they had 300 posts, across the nation. All these members of Congress. Nancy Pelosi was there speaking, saying, we got to stop the oligarchs. So here's my point. And we had these people, and we found out that this one group from North Carolina, they said, great, we want to speak, and we're going to talk about Gaza and Palestine. They're like, oh, no, sorry, you're not allowed to speak. What's interesting is this. Of all of the groups that they were associated with, they couldn't find one single anti-war group. Oh, nationwide protests, 300 locations, not one peep about Palestine, not one peep about war, not one peep about the war, China, Yemen, nothing. It was Trump and Musk are screwing everything up. What do you think about this? Very interesting, isn't it?
It is very interesting. And while you've been presenting this to me, now this is the first I've heard of it. So again, it's a possibly a shallow response to something that I've not looked into in detail, but looking at what you've shown me there, what I see is something that we've talked about many times, Garland, which is how do fights within the ruling class express themselves in society? When factions of the ruling class have different ideas about how the state should be run, what economic policy it should be following, they have various mechanisms at their disposal to influence the public debate and create a majority in their favor. One of those is mobilizing the masses around a program. And of course, if you want to mobilize the masses, you have to make it look as if what you're mobilizing them for is in their interests. Now, it's very interesting to me to see that the list of things they're saying Trump should get his hands off is a whole bunch of things obviously ordinary working class Americans can care about. And with NATO, as you rightly pointed out, squidged into the middle there, as if we just all accept. Everybody knows that people who care about Medicaid also care about NATO, right? And it's just in the list, and nobody's there to say who wrote this list. Obviously, there's no getting people together and saying what should be in this list. No, you present the list in a kind of demagogic way. It's exactly the way we talk about this lots, don't we? Exactly the way that people talk about immigration. They wrap up some things that people really care about: lack of jobs, lack of housing, lack of doctor's appointments, lack of school places. and they attach it to immigration, and then their whole point is to get you mobilized on their side of the immigration debate. But here we see clearly one of the things they're worried about is that Trump's activities are going to end up scuppering NATO, and NATO, of course, is a cornerstone of US dominance of the world. No matter what Trump says about we're paying too much, the US ruling class doesn't want NATO destroyed. The US ruling class wants NATO to continue. They want to persuade, extort their allies to pay more of the cost of preserving US dominance on the planet by saying to them, number one, it's in your interest to do this, and if you don't do it, we're going to punish you. So that's essentially their kind of sell, or the way they're presenting those things. But the mechanisms that the ruling class has for influencing public policy is lobbying, is think tanks, it's working class mobilization. But I think definitely what you're seeing there is very much what they would call an astroturfed movement, right? One that they're wrapping it up and trying to present it as if it came out of the grassroots, but very clearly, just from your quite superficial examination, it becomes evident quite quickly that this is no such thing. This didn't spring up out of nowhere. It's been created. They've given it a logo and a look and a list of demands that look as if they might be popular. They've hidden their real demands in the middle of some demands that they think they could bring people out on the street for. And they're playing into the culture wars presentation of Trump that has already set him up as a kind of polarizing figure. You love him or you hate him. And the people who hate him believe that everything that's wrong with the world is because of Donald Trump. And in that, because they've been presented with that narrative, they can be manipulated into believing that the section of the ruling class that's opposed to some aspect of policy under the Trump administration is their friend. And that's the whole thing, isn't it? Mobilize a section of the working class onto your side to help you force your position to become the dominant one and make it look like it's a demand of the masses. The masses are needed in capitalist politics to endorse policies and politicians. Otherwise, the system that just can't remain in place. But the methods which are used are becoming increasingly kind of, I think, transparent. I mean, the fact that you could pick up on that so quickly, the difficulty, I guess, is how many people have the time or the ability to just stop and look and see a bit further when they don't have a reliable working class press to guide them through this maze of information. The dominant narrative that comes through the corporate imperialist media tends to bash its way into people's heads, even people who are cynical to a degree or skeptical to a degree will find these messages are bashed into their heads just because they're so ubiquitous. But it's interesting to hear that these demonstrations are being given a lot of airtime. I think one other thing we should consider is that it's very important for the ruling class to have scapegoats for people's anger, which are not the real problem, the real cause of their problems, right? They don't want people to understand that it's capitalism and the crisis of capitalism that's impoverishing workers. The condition of working class people in the USA is getting worse fast. They want to know why, and they want to know what to do about it. Now, so a lot of them have been given Donald Trump as somebody to believe in who will make things better. Well, the other half is being given Donald Trump as someone to believe in as the reason it's all bad, right? Both of those are lies. Donald Trump is part of the problem. He's part of the ruling class, but so too are the sections of the ruling class who hate Donald Trump. They all want to preserve the very system which is impoverishing the workers.
Oh, that makes sense to me. And so ultimately what you get is what you had during I would say this. I said during feudalism, one could argue that capitalism is just a version. It is just, feudalism migrated into into capitalism. They try to make it a little bit more honest. Your thoughts on what's going on in Europe right now, and here's what I mean. The Macrons, the Starmers, these types of people, the von der Leyens, clearly they have nothing but hatred and anger for their own people in the working class, because these stubborn people won't do what they're told and go along with what they're told. At the same time, they don't seem to know what to make of Donald Trump, so they claim they want to fight him and they don't want to fight him. It seems that the ruling elite in the Europe are kind of isolated from everywhere. They're completely confused. And it's like this. We thought we were on your team, ruling class in America. We thought we were all a team working to shaft over the working class people of the world, and we would all benefit. And now that times are getting hard, it seems like we're on the menu. It seems like the dominant ruling class are now saying, okay, well, if times get hard in the main part of the empire, we might have to eat some of the outer edges to survive. What do you make of the ruling elite in Europe? And they're just they're out of control. They don't know what to do next. It seems to me. It seems to be there. I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but you know what I mean?
There certainly is chaos and confusion in all directions. That is, to me, a reflection of the depth of the crisis that the global capitalist economic system is in, and it's on a precipice of getting much, much worse. So it is creating chaos and confusion. There is, and the dissent over what's the best way to try to survive and what should be sacrificed in order to preserve what, that question becomes life and death for the capitalist, and the dissent and the hysterical kind of levels of public discourse are kind of ratcheting up as the crisis deepens, because it's an existential problem for every capitalist, for every monopolist, for every financier, for every country, for every government, for the entire system, right? So I'm sure there are back channel discussions going on all the time, and I think the politicians are not the greatest gauge of what on earth is going on, because I think most of them just read the papers like we do and wait for their instructions from financiers behind the scenes, and in the meantime, if they're asked to comment on something, they're probably a bit lost, right? Until they get the next briefing. But there's no doubt that there are back channel discussions going on all the time between the top financiers in all of the major imperialist countries, Germany, France, Britain, USA. They will be communicating with each other all the time and jostling for position and trying to influence the direction of travel, because fundamentally their interests are locked together. But there is also, of course, always contradiction. And I've talked about this before as well, so I'm sorry to those of you who watch this regularly and find me far too repetitive, but it's worth reminding ourselves of the fact that all the way back when Karl Marx was analysing capitalism as a system, he pointed out that it's a system that is based on and characterised by competition, and that the competition goes in three directions. So there's competition amongst the capitalists for workers to employ. There's competition amongst the workers to be employed. And there's a competition, there's a competition between the capitalists and the workers in terms of the terms of employment. So you have this, the competition amongst the capitalists is not just about access to workers, it's also about access to markets. And the very progress of capitalist business and capitalist existence as a system creates a situation where the capitalist who succeeds is the one who can outpace his rivals. You have this steady development where small capital becomes big capital, and little capitalists get eaten by bigger ones. So even at the very, very top of the system, where you have these super rich oligarchs, they still, even when they have a community of class interests against the working class and against smaller capitalists, they still, amongst themselves, there's still competition, there's still jostling position, there's still an aim to to become the biggest and eat the smaller ones. And small might then be actually pretty enormous, but if it's smaller enough to gobble it up, that's always the aim of it. So alliances between capitalists are always unstable. They're always characterized by a lack of trust and underlying willingness to cut the throat of your friend, right? There's no such thing as a stable alliance. This was expressed by, I think it was Lord Palmerston, when he was a British Prime Minister back in the 19th century, said, Britain has no permanent friends, only permanent interests, right? And he's expressing a kind of a law of capitalism there, and the same goes for not just for groups of capitalists, but for individual capitalists. Lenin, when he was examining imperialism, pointed out that when cartels would form between a few very big organizations, monopolies, to dominate the market in one commodity or another, or a whole field of commodities, the cartels were always shaky. So they'd make an alliance. They'd have in those days, there was a contract that was published in legal courts. These days, they pretend they don't have them. And the cartels, we can see that they're operating, but officially they don't, right? Because they know the masses don't approve of that sort of thing. But back in the days when Lenin was writing Imperialism, the cartel agreements were drawn up in courts of law. They had contracts dividing the market certain ways and setting a bunch of rules of how they would fix prices and what they were going to do to make sure that they got monopoly profits. But when in times when competition would burst out between them, the cartels would fall apart. Cartels would work for a while, they would be stable for a little while, but then sooner or later, the balance of forces within the cartel would change, and one power would feel it was at an advantage and no longer wanted to be in the cartel, have its hands tied. It wanted to be free to launch a full-scale competition on the people that yesterday it was in a nice, firm, polite alliance with. And that is capitalism. The idea that there's any possibility of stability, of permanent alliances, permanent friendships, there's no possibility of stability with a system like that, where everything is driven by the quest to maximize profit, to corner the market, to edge out rivals, for big fish to eat the small fish. Essentially, it's this huge historical process of concentrating wealth into fewer and fewer hands and bigger piles, of amassed capital. And that process, the longer it goes on for, the more senile the system comes, the more utterly parasitic it becomes. A lot of what we're seeing is symptoms of advanced decay and advanced parasitism manifesting themselves in all these absurdities and obscenities. And the kind of Donald Trump presentation of all of this as somehow, because US imperialism has now become so decadent, so senile, so parasitic, that the workers at home are left with nothing useful to do, and many of them hugely impoverished, even though they live in the richest country and the country that extracts a huge toll from the rest of the world. Donald Trump is trying to present that as if it's something to do with the rest of the world taking us for a ride. It's kind of, it's hugely ironic, but it's fundamentally an attempt to confuse the people about why it is that their lives are getting so bad so quickly.
Interesting. Well, I just thought of when you were talking about the reality that these people will never, or this system can't keep its promises, deals, whatever. I recall Sergei Lavrov saying that the West is, quote, agreement incapable. And I think I would change it a little bit. It's not that they're not capable of agreements. It's that culturally, they don't recognize any need to maintain agreements. I make an agreement because it benefits me now. And if a week from now I look at that agreement and I say it no longer benefits me, who cares? I only made it because it benefited me, and the benefits were transient. Once the benefits dissipated, well, okay, I don't need to deal anymore. Sorry, bad luck. I want to ask you this. I did a video earlier this morning, and I just felt like maybe you could articulate it in a different way. And that is, I did a video talking about why it's critically important to understand the Ukraine conflict. why it's critically important to understand who's who, what's going on, and to support the right side and to support justice, right? I just feel like right now it is critically important to understand exactly what's going on there, who's who and why. But maybe you could articulate that in your own words. I'm not going to say anything about how I said it because I don't want to lead the witness, shall we say. But I think that's very, very important. But I want to hear how you would articulate that and whether or not you would agree.
100% I agree, Garland. I think, well, it's been shown to us, really, hasn't it, that since the launch of Russia's SMO in Ukraine, it brought out very clearly to people, to the world, that there are, in fact, two sides in the world right now. There's the imperialists and their camp of allies and stooges, and there's everybody who wants to stand up to imperialism and get free in whatever form that might currently take, whether it's, free all the way to socialism and socialist development and a planned economy, or whether it's simply not being up for being controlled and dominated and asset stripped and looted by imperialism and under the total domination and subjugation of imperialism and the imperialist system. And what Russia did by finally putting its foot down in Ukraine, and we have to remember that the war had been launched, had been prepared for decades, had been launched by the West in 2014, not by Russia. Russia tried to help mediate peaceful conclusion to the war in Donbass for 8 years, which killed thousands and thousands of people, mainly civilians, but ultimately was forced to come in and intervene, not to fight Ukraine, but to stop the West from pushing and pushing and pushing towards the destruction of Russia. They weaponized the West, NATO weaponized Ukraine to turn it into a battering ram to destroy Russia. And Russia was aware that's what they were doing. They tried to find peaceful mechanisms for stopping it. They did all kinds of, negotiations of different types, economic, military. But it became clear that the US, in its declining financial state, was not going to stop. And really, the war in Ukraine brought all of that into the open in a way that became evident for people who are prepared to look and see. And what it's done, I think, is really highlight to the people of the world that you've got two options now. One is to say, imperialism is the best system. I'm going to stay loyal to it. It's perfectly acceptable to me that it drive us into ever more and greater wars to try to restabilize itself. I'm prepared to pay the blood price. Myself, my children, my neighbors, can go to war and fight in order to restabilize this system to the last Ukrainian, the last Pole, the last Lithuanian, and after that, maybe the last Yorkshireman, maybe that's fine. This is the only way for the world to operate. Or to understand that if we want a future where that isn't the equation, if we want a future where we can actually have a decent living standard for all people, cultured and peaceful and harmonious, and all the things that we actually know, we know really those things are possible and achievable, and therefore that it's obscene that they're not being achieved, and that the world is drowning in blood of workers and drowning in unsold products when people are so needy, food being thrown away when people are starving, all of these obscenities that we see, we know all of those are anachronistic. We know that there's not really a need for that situation to continue. But what we have to recognize is that, therefore, to get rid of that, we have to get rid of the system of imperialism. And to get rid of the system of imperialism, we have to bolster and support and join with all of the forces which are weakening, defeating, and destroying the system of imperialism. So that means in the home countries, that means building a working class movement that can beat imperialism on the domestic front. But on the world scale, that means standing alongside every single country that is standing up to US imperialism. And in this period, Russia has been at the forefront militarily of that struggle. It doesn't matter that Russia is no longer the Soviet Union and is not the socialist state we wish it was. It has declared its determination to defend its sovereignty. It is defending, because of that, it's not only defending its own sovereignty, it's defending the sovereignty of all the peoples who want to get free in the world. It has been inflicting huge, huge damage on US imperialism, on the whole imperialist system, financially as well as militarily. And that is a great boost to the anti-imperialist struggle in the whole world. And therefore, this is not something that's like, oh, it's just between Russia and Ukraine, and it's something far away, it's nothing to do with me. It is to do with every single person on this planet. You absolutely have to pick a side. And if you have a grain of sanity, you'll be picking the side of Russia and the anti-imperialist camp and saying, I want Russia to win. I want the anti-imperialist camp to get stronger. I want the imperialists to be defeated, and I need to work to boost that defeat at home and not just see it as, it's all right, Russia's defeating imperialism for me. That's not what we're saying. But definitely there are lots and lots of lessons about the nature of imperialism. Like you said there, Garland, that, increasingly imperialism has been exposed because of the Ukraine war. And all the things that have come out during the process of the imperialists being defeated in Ukraine, one of the things that's come out is their, as you said, what was that? Negotiation incapability. Right?
Yes, Sergei Lavrov said the U.S. is agreement incapable.
Right. So this fact that they're agreement incapable is something very important for us to understand. Like I said, it goes all the way back to Lord Palmerston. No permanent friends, only permanent interests. No permanent agreement. You're absolutely right. The rule makers in this system do not consider themselves to be subject to their own rules. The rules are for the little guy. The rules are for the other team. The agreement is to tie the hands of the other side while you are busy using the respite you get to carry on promoting your own agenda and come back around another time for another go if you haven't got it the first time. It's to lull your opponents to sleep. This happens in the class war between bosses and employees all the time. They make an agreement and you think, oh, brilliant, we won. You go to sleep and they come back and attack you, a couple of years later when you've lost all that brilliant militant organization you had to defend yourself with. Rules are for the little guy as far as this system really goes. It doesn't respect anything except the language of force. It's the only language it respects and recognizes. Ultimately, if you want to defend your sovereignty in a world where the imperialists still dominate, the only way you're going to do it is a capability and a willingness to back up your assertion of sovereignty with force. It's the only way in the end. It doesn't matter how many agreements you make, you have to be prepared. And we see that China also understands this. And this is something else that drives the imperialists crazy, because at the same time as doing everything they can not to get sucked into a destructive war with the USA, who wants a destructive war? Right? Of course, nobody wants it. This is one of the weapons the USA uses because they love a destructive war on everybody else's territory. And of course, the people targeted don't want their territory and their people being destroyed. They want their territory and their people being built up. So nobody's jumping into war, but they recognize they have to be ready to defend themselves at the last. There comes a point where they don't have a choice but to go to war to defend their sovereignty. Otherwise, they're going to get just rolled over. Russia showed that. The countries that have always said that were right. So, for example, the DPRK has always said we can only protect our sovereignty by developing our military capabilities, our defense and our nuclear deterrent. It's all there to stop the USA from thinking it can just bully us and roll over us. And we saw the opposite thing happen with Libya and Iraq, where they believed the promises of the imperialists, if you just get rid of your nuclear weapons, you'll be welcomed into the economic family of nations and we'll take good care of you. And of course, as soon as they were disarmed, they were destroyed, right? So this is the language that imperialism ultimately understands, and why, again, we have to recognize that in this battle against imperialism, it's a class fight. And our weapon in the end is class power and class organization. It's not the law. The law is a weapon that belongs to your enemy, and they will use it against you, and they themselves don't respect it. They inculcate in our heads a reverence for the law to stop us from being able to fight to use our own power and fight back, but also to imagine that there's a way through the law to bring them to book. But look at all the ways people are constantly trying to do that, how much time and energy they spend trying to fight legal battles against, some big Goliath, and how, of course, they can't win because the system's not set up for them to win. They waste a huge amount of time and effort trying. Look at the International Court of Justice right now and all its rulings on Palestine. And look at how the US just goes, meh. Right. Because the USA knows that they own that court and it can say whatever it wants under pressure from the whole of the rest of the world. But ultimately, it has no enforcement mechanism. And without an enforcement mechanism, it's hot air. It keeps a lot of people very, very busy. Yes, it's a PR loss. Yes, it exposes the system. But we've got to learn our lesson as well, Garland. And our lesson is not go back with a better case. The lesson is we've got to be organized to meet the language of force with the language of force. And that's the only way ultimately we're going to get anywhere. I did just want to add one small point about, you were saying about capitalism and feudalism. These are different systems, but there's one continuity between the two systems, which is that they are both exploitative systems whereby a minority class exploits the majority class. And the form of slavery, which began under the slave system and was open slavery, in feudalism changed to semi-slavery, serfdom. You're tied to the land, but officially as a person, you're free. You have more freedom officially in law than the old type of slave. But ultimately, you're basically a slave with a different name to in a different type of system to a different overlord. What happened under capitalism is the same. We went from feudalism to capitalism. It's a different type of productive system, works in a different way. We have different relations of production. But one thing continued, which is it's still a society in which a minority ruling class exploits the vast majority of the population. And our slavery is hidden from us in this system. And yet it remains. Karl Marx called capitalism the system of wage slavery. Fundamentally, as a worker, you don't have a choice because either you are a slave to capital or you starve. It's not that. So you're free. You're free to make that choice, Garland. Go off and make it. Okay. But as a class, we are enslaved. And as individuals, the choice turns out not to be that much of a choice after all for the mass of the people. So this is something important to understand. When people are complaining about, oh God, this is just feudalism. It's like, well, it's not feudalism, but it is still an exploiting society. And the fact that some people in the West managed to believe it wasn't actually just shows you how big of a social bribe they've been enjoying and how much it pains them to feel that they're losing it. Now you've got basically people who were privileged workers are being proletarianized, and they're shouting about it and say because their jobs are becoming automated or AI'd or just got rid of in some way or another, or their life conditions are going down, as are the life conditions of proletarians across the planet. But they feel that it shouldn't be happening to them. And they're like, oh my God, this is feudalism. Techno-feudalism arrived. And it's like, no, they just realized something they didn't understand before and they don't like it, which is they're members of the proletariat too.
I'll end by saying this. I want to show you something. We talked about this group called Indivisible. They were the ones behind this hands-off NATO. That's what we're starting to call it, the hands-off NATO protest, right? And I went on their website and I found that when the Ukraine conflict, the special military operation kicked off, Indivisible, these fighters for the little guy, right? They put out a statement. Let's take a peep at the statement. Indivisible put out a statement standing up for what's right. Indivisible on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Also, their co-founder, Leah Greenberg, released the following statement. This morning, we're all watching Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, a democratic country. So they start off with a lie. It's sovereign. It's democratic, even though we overthrew the
Two lies
U.S.
in there.
overthrew. Okay, this is not a situation in which there are two sides. Another lie, right? There is no justification for this act of aggression. Another lie. Ukrainian leaders and the international community have engaged in extensive diplomatic efforts to prevent this sort of escalation. Another lie. While Putin has rejected all efforts of diplomacy. Another lie. How do you fit this many lies? Russia's actions are a series of horrific, violent aggressions led by Putin and his oligarchs. The terrible human cost of this escalating conflict is the direct result of their aggression. Every sentence is a lie. We recognize and are grateful for the Biden administration's tireless efforts to avert this wholly unnecessary war. Every sentence is untrue. We now urge him and international leaders to lead a coordinated, multilateral response to Russia's actions, driving towards de-escalation. So now, the Biden team should drive towards de-escalation and an immediate ceasefire, as well as humanitarian efforts to support refugees fleeing from the fighting. Listen to this. There should be no military action without Congress approval. There should be no military action without Congress's approval. Our hearts are with the people of Ukraine. This is indivisible. These are the people that put up the hands-off NATO protests, and their initial statement about Ukraine. Every single word from one end to the other was not just a lie. That would be bad enough if they, just maybe misinterpreted things. It was the exact opposite of the truth. Do you have any comments before we go?
Yeah. It reminds me very much of the Trotskyists, who we've talked about before. This wrapping up of aggressive imperialist agenda and imperialist lies and justifications for their aggression in the language of peace and progress is exactly what the Trotskyites do. You can find a Trotskyite press release about the Ukraine war that will look exactly the same as that one. And I think something that's really important in these times of polarization and culture wars is to make a distinction between the misleaders of these movements, who are plants of the establishment and who are there to misdirect the people, and the people who get sucked up in following them. Our job is to be able to approach the people who are being misled and show them how they're being misled, and show them how it's against their interests to follow these people who are lying to them and manipulating them against their own interests. They are taking the people's desire for peace and using it against them in actually to promote war. That's what is very hard for people to realize if they haven't had it explained to them properly. And a lot of the people who get caught up in this will think they're doing the right thing to make the world a more peaceful and just place. And that's the importance, again, of a working class, class-conscious, anti-imperialist press that's able to help people orient themselves when they're being bombarded with so much hostile propaganda, whose real motivation is actually to demobilize the anti-war movement and to mobilize working class people in favor of aggressive, imperialist, brutal war, the kind of war that has just, as we see, since that press release was written by this indivisible crew, the war that they pretended to be against but were actually promoting has killed 1 million Ukrainian men, right? Has destroyed a huge amount of Ukraine's territory, and is still not finished. They're still busy helping the West to fight to the last Ukrainian, right? Even in the teeth of obvious defeat that's been obvious for, probably the last 2 years, they're still helping and calling for this war to be fueled rather than stopped. And as they do that, and as they conspire to send more military material and more people to their death, they do it in the language of peace, and they try to persuade workers that that's what they're doing.
Yes. Well, I'm not going to say these people are plants or agents or anything like that, but I will say I find it interesting that when they got married, so these two people got married in 2015. And for some reason, the New York Times, which is, the empire's mouthpiece, just did an article, Friends First and Always. Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin. Look, and they've got a cute little dog, and they're running around, and it talks about their parents, one whose father worked for the Obama administration, their backgrounds, where they met, oh, their first kiss. Oh, it's wonderful. They went on their first date and blah, blah, blah. Through it all, we continue to be best friends. We never stop being best friends. Isn't it interesting that just out of the blue, just two nondescript people just happen to meet in college, like the New York Times always does. It just picks people, random ones, of course, certainly not that they would be agents for the system, and says, let's do an article in the New York Times, Friends First and Always, and has a smiling little picture. I'm like, the New York Times did a promo operation for these people when they got married in their early 20s, and then like voila, that's who they are. And if you search, there's like Time Magazine's list of top 100 influencers, and both of them are like number 2, and they're everywhere. So it's like the machine carefully constructed this characterization of this power couple working for good. The New York Times article, you read it, and I remember I looked at it and I said, it really doesn't say anything. It just says they're nice, two young, nice people, and blah, blah, blah. Almost like we've got to introduce him on the scene, and then I'll let you get the last word. I know you got plenty to do, but the last word on the thought, like how carefully this characterization of these people were constructed in the New York Times of all things.
Garland, how can you be opposed to good news? I just don't know.
Right.
I just don't know how you got so cynical.
Hanging around you too much. I think it's you're taking me in a bit. No. That's what anti-imperialism will do. It'll kind of let you see through this fake glass building they have. All right, where can everybody go to find all your good works, Joti Brar?
Thank you. So we have a YouTube channel called Proletarian TV. We have a website, thecommunists.org, which you should definitely visit. Sign up to our emails. Follow us also, the Communists, on Telegram, my favorite social media platform, as everybody knows. I also have a channel, Joti Brar, just my name, on Telegram. And you can find us Twitter, places like that. But I really encourage people to go to our website, thecommunists.org, and visit our Marxist education program and start your own journey to becoming somebody who understands scientific socialism and how to apply it to the world, and can start to become a part of the solution to all the problems we're seeing rather than just a passive bystander.
Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I don't know if I'll be able to do next week. I will be traveling, but I will. We'll see. I may be able to, hopefully, at any rate. But I'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone. And might I add, I forgot to put my stupid thing that flows across the bottom that tells you follow me on Rockfin. Follow me on Telegram. I put stuff out on Patreon. I put stuff out on my Substack now. I'm writing articles on Substack, all kinds of stuff. And of course, if you want to donate, there's all the ways to donate. All of that stuff is there. If you want to send me, I actually have a PO box now. So if you want to send me a letter or send me some mail, some people don't like to do stuff online. Hopefully it won't be opened by the CIA, but I can't guarantee you that. But feel free to. The PO box is there now. And of course, the most important thing you can do, the big and important thing that you can do, people in the chat right now, is this. Share this on all your social media platforms. We don't have all of this on alternative media. We don't have all of the, advertisement and the ways to get our work out there and ways to get information out there. So what you can do, share it on Telegram, share it on Facebook, X, wherever you are, everyone out there. Right now we have 309 people. So 309 people should be sharing this on all of their social media platforms. Like and subscribe. Thank you very much. And join if you can. Click the join button. We're out.